Hello everyone, Leif Reed here. And today we have Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces. It is 1,000, not a million. Yes, it is 1,000 faces. So I first picked up this book because I had heard how, I'm obviously interested in mythology and ancient stories, but I didn't know that Joseph Campbell was very good friends with George Lucas, and they quite often collaborated on the Star Wars series together, at least to my understanding. So I thought, why not pick this up? And as you know, I think Joseph Campbell is most known for his iteration of the hero's journey, that essentially every great myth throughout history follows a certain pattern. Irrevocably, they all kind of flow into one another. So what do we get with the hero with 1,000 faces? My expectations with this book would be that Joseph would go through each phase of the hero's cycle, give an example, and then kind of elaborate on how it functions and how it works in one book versus another, one culture versus another. And so we sort of get that. What we do get is he does go through each stage, and the book is divided into the cycle of the hero's journey chronologically, and he does take multiple examples, and that's where it ends. And so I was a little bit disappointed by that, because I wanted a little bit more maybe context on, we say the call to action, and he gives an example of a few stories. And then I would have liked to say, well, what is this call of action versus this call of action? How do they differ? How do they relate? How are they, why were they done differently? How is it done today in modern media? And what makes this call of action so good? Those are the questions, those are the answers you are not getting out of this. So what the good news is that to really understand the hero's journey, all you really need is that wonderful little chart showing the hero's journey. But when it comes to the book itself, it is also very good for exposure to different myths you might have not heard of. There were a lot of Irish and Middle Eastern and Asian myths and Polynesian myths contained in this book that I was totally unaware of. And it is wonderful for that aspect that I was exposed to those. There are, of course, coming to age stories and such. And I will mention that the Polynesian myths that are mentioned throughout the book are extremely graphic. Frankly, I had trouble reading some of these passages, and I've read some pretty terrible things, but they were very unsettling to read. And I believe they are Polynesian or New Guinea, to be more accurate. And once you've read once you've seen that hero's story chart or graph, you pretty much understand most of this book. And then really he's just recounting, different stories. And so, it doesn't really elaborate on the what's a good call to action, what's a bad call to action. This just kind of says, well, this is the thing and here are the things, and he doesn't really relate them. So he kind of leaves that to us, the viewer, or perhaps to someone else who can write a better book. But, so that's essentially what it is. Ever since I've read this, every time I see a movie or a game or whatever, I am constantly, almost constantly thinking to myself, oh, there's the call to action, there's the crossing of the threshold, there's the death, the dive into the abyss. So it's kind of fun to pinpoint and compare and say, okay, so, that's interesting. They did the call to action and the crossing of the threshold in one, and the summoning of the guardian, in all one swoop, or they paced it out like this, and you begin to see, the pattern, but you more so begin to notice the differences in which they are presented, and especially true in different mediums. 200 pages split into 14 chapters. And you can see the spacing of the font here. And, there are some illustrations scattered throughout. And so you could probably read it in a few days. That being said, I actually would not recommend this book. I think if you've seen the hero's journey chart, and you can very easily be like, oh yeah, this story is called. You can relate each chapter to a movie you saw recently, perhaps. I honestly would skip this. Honestly, it is great if you want to be exposed to unusual myths that you aren't familiar with. But as it stands, I actually wouldn't recommend this. I think it's perfectly fine to study his graph. There's some lovely interviews on YouTube, and I would kind of leave it at that. And yeah. Lovely. I can't praise him enough though, because as I said again, his idea of the hero's journey is stuck wherever I look and I go at any story. Just not the best book, but the concept stands by itself. Anyway, so there it is, and as always, keep reading. Thanks.